I'll get back to working on the lathe here a little bit to get it together. I shouldn't be working on it today because it's such a nice day outside. I should be doing stuff out there and reserve this for rainy days. But I'm getting pretty close to getting it all back together, and I figured if I get this out of my hair, then I'll have it available to use and I won't have to worry about it anymore. Now I got the gearbox back on, the change gearbox, and I got the lead screw and the feed shaft or feed screw on. What I didn't do was put this banjo on here and the big gear on here because the banjo had some rust on it. So I took it down to the shop, wire brushed it, got it all cleaned up, and then coated it with some OSFO. And it's supposed to set 24 hours before you do anything with it, so that's where I left off. And then the weather cleared up and I've been flying, busy doing some other things, and I haven't got back to this yet. But I just went down and took the banjo off the hanger and cleaned up the excess OSFO off of it. And I didn't want to paint it because I don't know how adding paint to that is going to affect it. It probably wouldn't affect it at all, but I didn't want to take a chance on it. So what I did was OSFO it, and now I've got it sitting in the oven and I'm warming it up to about 350 degrees. Then I'm going to dunk it in some engine oil and see if I can't get some oil to penetrate it and kind of blacken it or whatever and get some protection on it from that. I've got some traps that I've got to do that too. They're old traps that we had on the hanging on the wall that got pretty rusty, and wife had a mink in the chicken pen killing chickens, so we got the traps out and got them cleaned up and to use for that. And then we didn't wind up using those, but rather than let them rust all up again, I'm going to go ahead and warm them up and dunk them in engine oil too to protect them. And then the next time we use them, all we have to do is clean the engine oil off of them. We don't have to worry about cleaning the rust off of them. Anyway, that's what I'm doing here now, so I figured I'd work on this a little bit more. One of the things that's been bugging me for quite a while was this motor, this lathe. The belts on here are pretty loose, so I want to tighten those up while I'm working on everything else. Just looking at that, trying to figure out how to do that. There's no pivot on it or anything. What there is this heavy casting in here that's attached to the main lathe body. Casting on it, it has some slots in it, so you can loosen those bolts up there and let that drop down to tighten that up. So there's one bolt here on the outside, and then there's two bolts all the way there on the inside. Oh, they're a pain to get to from here. So I took that splash shield off, and I'd be able to get to it from around the other side. So this bolt takes a 17mm wrench, and of course that's provided in the kit that Grizzly sends you with the lathe. Go. Now I want to try to make sure and get this motor so that it's lined up right, so that the pulleys are lined up this direction, which means that the back end of this portion of the motor here is going to be held up by the belt, but the back end of it I want to raise up a little bit to make sure those grooves in the pulleys stay lined up. That looks better. I don't know whether I can make a double belt work on that or not. There's a pretty good gap in between these two, but that would be better if you had a double belt on there like I put on the sawmill. Right now I got one belt that's tighter than the other. There's not as much adjustment on that as a guy would think. You can't really cock the motor back and forth that much. So I've got it lined up so the pulleys are staying lined up with that. Oh, I remember now, I also looked in here and there's, well, there it is way back there. There's a set screw back there. I didn't see a set screw on here before to help hold that pulley on there. And the set screw is on the opposite side of the keyway, so that's just, instead of pushing in on the key, the set screw is pushing down, so that would kind of cock that. That's not real good. The problem is here is this one belt is looser than the other one. That's just systemic of having two belts on there instead of one broad belt, one double belt. I don't know whether I can get a double belt that'll fit that or not, because there's pretty wide distance between the grooves on that. That belt's pretty loose. This one's nice and tight. But that's better than it was. One of the things that bugs me about this lathe is this light. And the light really doesn't bug me. It's not a bad light. I think it's LED. I think this is LED. I think they advertised them as being halogen, but I think that's upgraded to LED. And it shines down there. You can put it in on your parts and stuff, and it's not a bad light. I've got pretty good light here in the shop, in the basement as it is, but old eyes need as much help as they can get. But what bugs me is this cord. They've got this cord armored pretty nice, but it just lays down here in the tray in the bottom, among all the swarf and the oil and stuff, and it just drags back and forth in it. I'm going to try something here. I've got some cable clips, and these are just stick-em-on clips. They got double-sided tape on them. I could drill that out and put clamps on there, cable clamps on there, but I don't really feel like doing that, and I may want to change this at some point in time if I get a DRO or something to put on here. So right now, this is what we're going to do, is stick this on here like this. Wash this off with paint thinner, and then I wiped it down again with acetone, so these things should stick on there pretty good. So I could use a little bigger size than this one for this, but this is what I got. There we go. Now, I want to run this carriage up here close to the headstock, as spindle as I can, so I know how much to put this up there. I use several of these on here because they're just stuck on. I don't know how well they're going to hold, but I've got a bunch of them I bought for another purpose. Oops, that one's not going to hold. That one won't hold. These others are holding good, that one don't, so I'll wipe that down with acetone again. And wipe this down with acetone again to get all the slickum off of it so the stickum stays. That should be better. I keep that from hanging down there and all the swarf and the oil and everything. That helps. It's still gonna wind up dragging down there a little bit when we take that carriage back the other direction towards the tailstock, but it's going to be a lot better than what it was. Well, it took a little bit of figuring, but I figured out how to get this drive end all back together. I had the banjo off of there, so I'd put this gear here that drives the crash box. I put it on so it didn't get lost. I had to take it off, and then trying to figure out how that banjo, that adjuster arm goes in there, that was kind of a challenge. I looked in my videos and I didn't really have a good picture of that in the videos, and the parts manual or the manual for the lathe doesn't really show it, but I finally figured it out. It's got the long arm here goes up and the short curved arm goes down. Well, then I couldn't figure out how to get the gear to stay up on there. I had an extra real long stud in there on the pile. I finally remembered or figured that that went in there. There's a threaded hole in the case right here, and that stud goes in there. There's a lock nut on that that tightens it up against the case. And then there's another nut, a big washer, thrust washer, or bearing washer really, that goes on the inside of that with a nut behind it, and then another bearing washer and a nut on the outside of that, and that's what adjusts the banjo, the tension or the adjustment for the gears. So I finally figured that out, and that was kind of a challenge getting that on there. Had that adjustment arm off of there first and put it in there. It wouldn't be so bad, but I had to take the nuts off and stuff and thread it through the hole. And anyway, we got it on there, got it adjusted, got the gears on there. Everything all works real well now. So we got power through the headstock and down through the output shaft, the gears, and into the change gear box. That's working. I still have to get some grease and grease those gears here. I got some Pinion Gear grease I think I'll put on there That stuff is real sticky and stays on real good, so I think I'll put that on there to grease those gears up. But got those on there and adjusted properly, so that's working. Over here on this side right now, I've got the feed screw in and that's turning. Okay, this handle's turning real slow. Got everything in the slowest gear I've got, so that's feeding that direction. Anyhow, that works, and the lead screw turns. Anyway, we're back in business there. I'll get the covers on, get those gears greased up and get the covers on over the gears. And this thing will be back in shape again, 110%. Years ago, I got an old dinosaur of an excavator, a throwback to the ancient age of cable rigs and steam engines practically. It was a 1969 Coring 466. And it worked okay, but it was kind of a bastard child when it was new. And I got it. It was pretty well worn out. In fact, I wound up scrapping it out. I still got it out here in a pile in the yard. So anyway, one of the things that I inherited with that was a case of this stuff here. Chevron pinion grease, MSSP. MS must be molybdenum disulfate maybe, I don't know. Doesn't say. Anyway, this stuff is pretty tenacious. It sticks. It was used for the open gears and pinions and stuff on that old excavator. Like I said, I got a case of it. This can was only partially used. I dug it off the shelf. That's what I sprayed on this gear train on this lathe. And judging from what I can see here, my experience so far, that stuff is probably a perfect thing. I know it was good on the gears on the excavator. It's stuck on it pretty good, but it looks like it's going to be just the thing for these gear train of this lathe, because of course it's in a spray can and it went all over the place in here, but I couldn't get that stuff off hardly. I'd used a little bit of paint thinner on rags, and I used my older blue shop rags first, shop towels first, and used them up, but it would clean it up. The paint thinner dilutes it, but then the rags get it on it, and every little place that it's on the rag it winds up smearing all over. So I went through all my old shop rags getting that stuff cleaned up before I went to a couple of new ones. But that stuff, I think, is the real deal for this. I've quieted that down, but that stuff sticks like stink. Once it gets on there, it's not throwing it off at all. It's sticking pretty good, but like I said, spraying it on there, I should have used some kind of a mask or something on that to mask off the places I didn't want it to go. Basically what I did is I just turned this on, let it run, and then sprayed on here in these big gear, but it still went back there and made a mess. But anyway, that greases those gears up pretty good, and like I said, that stuff sticks on there like stink. So that should be good for a while, and it don't take very much of it, so I've got half a dozen cans of that stuff left. It'll last me longer than my lifetime on this thing. Maybe I'll find something else I can use it on some other time, but that's just the thing for this lathe. Well, anyway, that's all cleaned up now. I can put the cover back on it. Well, there it is, all back together, covers all back on and everything. All working just the way God intended it to when He built it. So I got a little bit of a mess to clean up there from the brass, from the pins that the pin that I made for the shear pin for that lead screw, but otherwise everything's all cleaned up, ready to go. I'm glad to see it back together. First time in a little over a year since it's all been back together. Now I can go work on something else.